And it supports what Alan is saying in this talk and what he said for many, many years. And part of that to understand, again, about avoiding the dialectic and getting caught up in left-right politics and emotions and, digital hatred, et cetera, is that we are living through this long-term plan. And things will come out, like what Hirsch has exposed and Brandon Turbeville is shining a light on. And they'll say, oh, it wasn't like that at all, the weapons of mass destruction story. But the initial propaganda sticks and it takes over people's minds. And that is why it's just so important to tone it down a little bit, tone it down. Don't be just outraged and ready to go, pick up your online sign and go hammering somebody with it. Because 10 or 15 years down the road, they release, oh, well, here's the truth, here's the leaked document. Doesn't matter. People are so caught up in whatever the 2 minutes of hate of that day are, they're not paying attention to it. It's easy peasy to manipulate people. So there is a lot going on in the region, and it's about a lot more than what the media is presenting us with. And any time that we see the kind of vitriol and hostility that is happening country by country. They're protesting in Germany. We know what's going on in the United States, and there's a little bit of this kind of protest, counter-protest going on across the world right now because of the Israel-Hamas war. But there's so much more happening in the region. And in this talk, Alan goes into some of the long-term, the list, that list. So some of the long-term goals that are at stake. So I will give you probably what's going to end up to be about 3/4 of this talk from Alan. It was 2019, so it wasn't yet in the epic length of talks. But like I said, I want to use a little bit for something down the road. And I'm going to shave it and make it a little bit tighter for you. I will link to the original audio for anyone who wants to listen to it. We don't have the transcript up on the site. The transcriber has been busy getting everything into HTML and then sending it to me, and I've been uploading as they come in, or trying to. I'll have to say the transcriber tends to keep ahead of me. But hopefully the transcript for this talk will be up in the next few months. It is great. It's really great that so many from 2019 through 2021 have gone up recently. So I encourage you all to visit the website, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, see all the other official sites, the newer channels, see that there are thousands of audios that you can listen to, and there are transcripts. And I hope that you all will get something from today's talk, and also keep me going by visiting the website, seeing how you can donate or make a subscription donation and help keep this going. So I wish you all a good week, to keep your heads, to not get caught up in the dialectic. The dialectic is how plans get moved forward. We're living through, as Alan would say, a script, but we are living through a long-term agenda. And it'll be way down the road when, if there is something there and, the next Carl Quigley comes along who sifts through the archives and pieces together a little bit of real history before we can know what's really going on in this region. But there are lots and lots of clues, many from Carl Quigley and many from Alan Watt. And there's a lot of clues out there as to the real reasons why this region of the world is in constant upheaval. Don't just get stopped and stuck on the obvious. And have a good week, and hang in there through the increasing onslaught of crises. Take care.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watkins. This is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 23rd of June 2019. I hope you're all getting along through all the changes that are happening rapidly now, of course. You're certainly living through interesting times, although if you've been studying reality for a long time, you'll know it's a kind of Groundhog Day, and we're building up to a repetition of what we've been doing for the last 20 odd years, or actually longer than that, with wars, etc., as they go for Iran as well. One way or another, it will be accomplished, because Iran was on the list from the 1990s to be taken out, and they never give up the list, of course. Wesley Clark talked about it, the journal, and it's still ongoing today. And Iran has been under embargo for a long time, and that's devastating to these countries. Iraq was the same thing. We found that Madeleine Albright was questioned on television about the well over 500,000 children. Eventually it turned to be about 1 million. And women too, and the elderly had died because of embargo, couldn't get medicine, couldn't get food in for a long, long time. And that's what happens. So they're trying to do the same with Iran, of course, for a long time. And Iran's left with the decision of, well, breaking out, obviously. And what they hope to do is make Iran make that kind of decision, a desperate decision, which gives the credence for counterattack by the West, of course. And that's how strategy works in these kind of shows. Everything is public perception. But mind you, all of our news, all of our reality today is public perception management. And it's skewed by professionals. I don't know if you've noticed incredible changes in authority and with the authoritative techniques that are being used now today on the whole of society. From children all the way up to adults now. We're all treated as children, actually, by professionals. But before I get any further in that direction, I have to remind you to help donate to me at cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. And when you're there, I always say that take a note of all the other links I have on that website. These are my official sites. And you can order the books and discs from these sites. If you buy from elsewhere, they're not mine. Someone else is putting them out. So everything's official is on cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. Take a note of them all. And if anything happens to the com site, at least you can get my talks on the other sites that will be left. You never know, you see. We're living these strange, interesting times, as I say. And you can buy the books and discs, as I say, or you can donate. It tells you how to do it at cuttingthroughmatrix.com. And the ways of payment and donation are listed there too. Remember, you can also send a personal check to me if you still have checks. You can also get checks from your bank, or you can get a postal money order from the post office and send that. It doesn't cost much, and it's very cheap actually. And if you're from outside Canada and you're sending it to Canada, just ask for an international postal money order at the post office, and they'll give it to you for the amount and so on, and that can get cashed to you, you see. Because I can see other techniques coming into play as we get managed by our professional managers, the nudge units, as they call it, the behavior modification experts. And we have teams of them in every country now, literally working on managing us. We don't elect them. No government agency has come out to tell you to vote or even to have a say in these agencies getting established. They just appear, of course. And you still think you're living in democracies as you get managed. I gave talks on these before about these nudge units, behavioral insights teams. They're much bigger than a few people here and there. There's teams and layers of them. And they also extend all the way into the internet community, of course, because internet itself is a massive control system down to the personal level, even for those who think they're quite safe and happy and they're being awfully good. We're awfully good, don't want to bother me. Believe you me, if you're quite happy being managed by experts and who are watching every single thing that you do, even predicting what you think, and because they're studying how you think, you see, then good luck to you. It's a sad thing that Aldous Huxley said it. He says they'll come to us and they'll love their servitude, and that's what you are. Because it's not painful for folk at the moment, you see. And that's the key, at the moment. Because it's to get really bad as we go into the depopulation austerity agenda under the pretext of climate change, etc. And this is no speculation on my part. I have their documents, I have their books of the big players that came out with the ideas on how to control us all. They love to publish their books for themselves because they have tremendous egos. And obviously those who want to manage the world and everybody in it have to have big egos. We've seen the tyrants down through history, and we call them that, luckily enough. But unfortunately we can't recognize them for today as for what they are, because like Madison said, they always take away your freedoms bit by bit, under the guise of keeping you safe. And that's really how it is. These are old techniques, you understand. And believe you me too, if they didn't want terrorism, they would not have caused the problems in the first place to take out countries across the Middle East. It wouldn't have happened. And terrorism could be managed much, much more easily in that case, if there were any radicals at all. But causing mass displacement across the world is part of the whole agenda, of course. And I was just thinking today, and I've thought many times before too, where are all the far left groups that were against wars, that used to march in the streets against wars? Where are they? Who has switched them off? Because they all follow leaders, and their leaders know what they're doing, and they take orders from higher authorities too. It's also interesting that these groups, heavily well-funded groups, because we're in a new Soviet. The true new Soviet is more Soviet than the old system was, because Soviet means rule by council, basically. An NGO type to deal with appointed commissars to manage a certain area of society. We have lots of them now. We've got more than the Soviet ever had. And the difference with the Soviet Union is they appointed them, the leaders of them, I should say, to manage them. We have them called non-governmental organizations, and we have thousands of them. That also, most of the big ones anyway, are all funded by our government, our tax money, for changing society completely and managing society too. And they're also augmented by the massive funding from the big foundations. I did so many talks years ago about the foundations and what their functions really were. And it's true, the richest people on the planet direct where we're going in the world and how we'll act and behave, not right down to population and how to manage the population, and even how to coerce the population into accepting eventually mandatory sterilization and things like that. All the way back to the days of Malthus. And don't forget, we've done this before, and we're still doing it in other countries we call third world countries. We pay for it, but what they want to do across the world. And that's what globalism is all about. If you notice again, the same groups who do not protest the war, against the wars, and the displacement it causes, are the first ones to champion the end of nation states, which is Marxian, of course, which of course is also the globalist, which is the capitalists at the top, who own it all. It's all the same system. And the trick of running the world is to create different, not just sides, but factions within sides. And they're all fighting each other. And they never come to understand that the dialectical process leads them to the conclusions or to the points where those at the top actually want them to come to change. You can't get change without conflict. If you've got a happy, say, stagnant population, as I like to call it, and you want it to change, it won't change. It's quite happy the way it is. So you create dissatisfaction for a segment and have them go at it with the other group. And eventually you'll get a synthesis coming out of it. And that's what the whole Trotskyist doctrine was basically based on, was the Hegelian dialectic. But today we have the true Soviet system. We're unelected, but appointed by governments. NGOs are running our lives through climate change and so on, and sustainability groups galore. There's thousands of them across the world. Sustainability, well, guess what sustainability is? Sustainability is all about too many of you. Forget all the other stuff. It's to do with you. And they have charts out of how much it's going to cost the world, and how much carbon you'll cost for every child that comes into it, and how many things that child will need growing up, and food, clothing, and yada, yada, yada. And that's all done through this magic religious act, you see, because it's all a religion to believe in it, you see. A magic act of deciding how much carbon and energy you're costing the world is to make up these wonderful algorithms to work out how much you're costing the planet, basically. What a farce this is. You need an awful lot of faith to believe in this religion. Because it's a farce, complete farce. Although you might say it is a religion in a sense, and it definitely has a plan, and it definitely has, and it demands worship. It demands worship. It's completely intolerant of anything against its own agenda. Completely intolerant. And even has those within the structural parts of the system and schools and everything teaching the same plan. And it will tolerate no contrary opinions to what is mandated. Completely intolerant. This is not a happy system coming in, folks. And it's not new. It was predicted a long time ago in the 1800s and 1700s too. You had characters coming out, and you eventually had Thomas Malthus and about population reduction, and you had that continued through eugenics and Darwin, you see, and all the way into the different plans of sterilizing people in America, and they did it in Britain too, calling them unfit, and across other parts of Europe, and then they kept doing it after World War II in the US, and eventually it was partially, it's not quite stopped actually. Today it's wonderful when you think about it, because we'll all get up in arms about, oh, that's terrible, they could sterilize those people, but now they're talking about compulsory sterilization for men and women to save the world. Nothing to do with intellect or IQ or anything, no, to save the world. If you're in a certain category, yeah, you'll be designated as for termination if you want to take sterilization. And the amount of data that they published on this is astonishing, to save the planet. And of course that's the whole idea. That was the excuse they came up with, to save the world. It was either going to be a war, a massive long war that would depopulate the world to the rafter, and failing that, they'd have to convince the public that you're in a war mode, which the war is man killing the planet. You're the enemy. You see, that's what the Club of Rome said. And they were given the task of finding an excuse to do it all. And all the big players were attached to the Club of Rome, even up to the present time actually, and on the board of it too. Quite fascinating. And at first they came out with the coming ice age. And the top players published books on it too. And often these top players had relatives or even their wives on the board of the Club of Rome. It's a small world when you get into who runs it all. And then you have the different government departments that are constantly creating new departments to study us and manage us. And then they farm it out again to NGOs and agencies and the private sector. This is the true Soviet has surpassed the old Soviet system. And they couldn't even go as far as this with indoctrination in school, where they're reinventing reality completely with indoctrination that children are getting today. It's quite fascinating to see it happening and to study their papers and the techniques of doing it. It's quite something in itself. But what really is horrifying is the fact that they have no problem in lying, teaching an agenda with the use of lies and saying that lies are necessary to coerce the people along this agenda, again to save the world. you see. And if that doesn't offend you, being lied to all the time about what their agenda is really all about. And of course the agenda has got nothing to do with democracy. The Club of Rome has stated in their own writings that democracy doesn't work. They want something harder. They want really like a fascist system. That's what they really admire, where the diktats come from the top and you obey at the bottom. Without any arguments, that's what they want. But what gets me too is the perfection you'll see in other countries that have been on the path longer because of their cultural society system. And China, this is not speculation, it's fact. The United Nations has published many documents on China to be the model state for the world to follow on everything that it does to manage the people, to train the people, to manage them and so on. And China, and not just them, every major organization out on the planet there and countries have fawned over China in the past because it's the dream of the West to be like China. The West has a problem, and Margaret Thatcher and others have stated the problem. Those in power, in the past at least, had to give a semblance of acknowledgement to the complaints, of understanding the complaints of the public, and sometimes acting on it, and so on. That's what's called this con game of democracy. It's always a bit of a con game, but they have to at least put a show on, right? But in totalitarian type systems, and don't forget China is still called communist to this day, with a very, very officious governmental system. And you have to belong to the party if you want to own a business. And the party literally is all powerful. In fact, just in the papers now, they've got, I think it was the head of, it was a Chinese man who was the head of Interpol, or if it was a Chinese branch, or, because Interpol is international, right? But he was found guilty of embezzling millions in bribe money. And that kind of corruption is typical with China, is with every other country. But China doesn't let that go. They really deal with it, which of course a lot of folk outside China admire. They deal with it when officials are corrupt. But the same token, China has come from a collectivist society. It's a very ancient system of ruling the people. They've tried everything. Even in ancient times, they had a socialist type system. In ancient times, an authoritarian system, almost you might call it a system run by nobility at one time too. They've tried everything in ancient times. And so there's nothing new to China, but China itself, again, generally has a different system of obedience of the people to those in power and authority. So, under communistic system, they still can have a lot of freedoms. They have a lot of the freedoms, even like music, etc. They can go to dances, they can drink and that kind of stuff, and buy their clothes. And commerce is doing well in China. Believe it, that was. I can remember when suddenly China supposedly went capitalist, and they had interviews in the streets for the Westerners to watch. And Mao Zedong say, "Oh yeah, Mao Zedong would have liked this system where money is good," and you know, it was a night and day change. It was as shocking as when they just announced that the Berlin Wall had come down in Germany, in Berlin. So that's a kind of shock of those who'd lived through all this Cold War phase, and he is an arch enemy of capitalism, supposedly. And today, of course, it's the top. It manages more capital than the rest of the world combined, I think. And yet they're still communist. There's no, you have one ruling group, and that's all you've got is one party system. But at the same time, I understand, to an extent, the Chinese system, because if you truly want an advanced socialist system, you'll have a Chinese type naturally, where the people will have a certain amount of freedom, but they're so well studied, just like we are here, like you wouldn't believe. And they're maybe even better, like school to work ideas, at training youngsters for particular areas that they have, where they could excel, actually. And as I say, they have quite a lot of freedoms, but when you look at the social credit system they have, it's completely managed from the top down, which is here too. In the West, they call it shadow banning at the moment, with the behavioral insights teams nudging you and prompting you and all that kind of thing, and even punishing you to an extent. And shadow banning in the West, where you won't even know, you just notice that suddenly you'll find that very few folk are finding you on the net. There's nothing declared, you see. It's all done, and you'll come to conclude